Hey guys, how's it going? Mies here, back with another Epic 7 video, and today we are going to be talking about the new hero, Landy. So, she looks really dope. She's a limited unit. I'm going to pull her for sure. But, before we go into what I think about her, if you aren't subscribed right now, which a lot of you are, I know, like 90% of you guys are watching this video, hit that subscribe button. I really appreciate it. Alright, so, going into what I think about her. Let's look at her multipliers, right? S1, attack rate of 1, average. And then S3, attack rate of 0.9, which is kind of on the average / low side for an AoE attack. Of course, AoE attacks usually are kind of lower multipliers, but this is an S3, so there is a cooldown related to it. So it's fairly low for a cooldown reliant skill. Sort of cooldown reliant skill. And the soul burn is 1.5, which is also fairly low for a soul burn. Now, it says that it increases the amount of damage it does when you consume all fighting spirit. And unfortunately, this data mine does not say how much it increases it by. But according to, I think, this damage calculator, it's something like 1.2 or 1.25 or something like that. So that's kind of what you're thinking of when you're talking about full fighting spirit. So really, kind of your goal of this character is to cycle a lot, right? She gets speed from her S3, she gets combat readiness from her S1, and she gets fighting spirit every time she goes and there's an enemy with a buff on them. So, and you also get percent attack as well, so 10% each turn. So at maximal. So the goal of this character really is to cycle a lot, so you do a lot of damage and go up against enemies who have buffs. If you don't have any buffs, it's kind of useless because her S2 resets her S3 if she gets max fighting spirit, and she gets more fighting spirit per buff granted to the enemy. So yeah, that's what you're gonna want to do, and that's the goal of her. Now, I'm gonna say that her damage is decent. It's not bad. With attack buff, with max attack stacks, and you're probably going to want to build her bruiser because you're going to want her to survive, right? Take multiple turns and things like that. So you want to build her fast, healthy, probably like 13, 14k HP at least, and then, bruisery. So I gave her pretty damn good stats. Not like crazy stats, but like above average stats for sure. 3,000 attack, 280% crit damage. I'd say the average person's probably gonna have like 2,700 attack with 280% crit damage with those types of HP stats and defense stats. But let's go with the above average, right? To see kind of really where most people are probably gonna have her, or like the higher tier people are gonna have her. So this is a respectable damage. Full fighting spirit, max attack stacks, 9k. Now, one of the problems with every time you're using a stacking ability, right? It's like getting him to survive, especially because she's not like a tank, right? She's going to be built a bruiser. So if you look at the no attack stacks, she still does relatively decent damage, especially if you are able to refresh her S2 very often. But the important question is, how often is she going to be refreshing her S2, right? Making it so that her S3 comes off cooldown. Well, she is going to be moving fast, right? So she's most likely going to be getting a lot of turns. She has speed, you're going to build her decently fast, and she is cycling with her S1. So, she's going to be getting turns pretty quickly. Now, let's think about how many buffs a unit often has, right? So starting off the match, they might even have enough to give you full fighting spirit because you start off with 50. Then let's say they have an FCC barrier, or all 4 of them have immunity plus like an FCC barrier. You're gonna get 100 right there. You're gonna fire it off really quickly. So that first one's pretty free. But the ones coming up are the ones you have to think about. So on average, units will probably have about 4 or so buffs, 1 for each unit, I'd say, right? And there might be ones with like 2 buffs. So if you're starting from 0, you've already used your fighting spirit. How fast are you going to get your buffs back, your fighting spirit back to max? Well, it's going to take you about anywhere between like 2 to 3 turns, I'd say, given every unit has either 1 to 2 buffs on them already. So that's pretty quick. But the thing is, we have to think about, like, you know, what type of buffs they're using, right? So most of the time, you're going to have like a Crow or an Alencia, right? They're going to be giving defense buff. You're probably going to be giving, you know, they're probably going to be getting attack buff too, right? So, you know, their 1 or 2 buffs are probably going to be either defense or increased attack, maybe a barrier in there. Now, the important thing to think about is that when they, or actually with Diane in her case, getting the anti-crit buff, right? So if you think about most of the buffs in the game that you get, they're buffs that reduce damage. So even though her damage is decent right here, and let's put her at max stacks, right? 9k damage, you know, once every 2 to 3 turns, that's a lot of damage. But if you think about it, adding the increased defense, 6.4k damage now, that's a little bit less impressive. And that's, of course, with max stacks, with full fighting spirit. Let's say you're like 2 turns in, you know, and you have max full fighting spirit. That's, you know, not that much damage. That's pretty negatable, especially if it's going to take you 1 or 2 turns, right? And before I talk about how good I think she is, let's kind of talk about her relevancy in the meta against, you know, other meta units. So I've compiled a list of what I think are most of the meta units, or, you know, a lot of these might even be like kind of like pocket picks, or like, you know, you might not see them very often, but they're at least somewhat relevant in the meta. You'll see them every now and then. And I've kind of put them in the list of like not relevant all the way up to, you know, this unit Landy counters them. And this is the list that I came up with. So let's start off at the top counter, right? So the reason why I think she counters Vivian is because of the fact that Vivian gives 2 buffs, right? She gives immunity and attack. And now, what I was mentioning earlier with the reducing of damage from, you know, defense buff, anti-crit buff, that doesn't exist for Vivian. So you're going to be taking that full-on, what was it, like 9k damage to the face pretty much every turn, because those buffs also last quite a while as well. So that's why I think that she's, you know, counters Vivian. You're probably not going to want to pick Vivian into her. Is she Vivian very relevant in meta? Decently relevant. I'd say, you know, people usually, you know, she's one of, not like the popular units, but like somewhat often picked. Charlotte, let's go down to the good against. Charlotte, again, with the thing with immunity, right? It's not something that's going to reduce the incoming damage, but it adds buffs to you, so you're going to be taking more damage because of more, have given more focus. Same with Rowana, revive buff. Another situation where you're not reducing the amount of damage. And the reason why I have Charles and Emil Ken here is because, not just because, well, Charles gives himself an team buff, right? So that's already decent, and it doesn't, like, you know, add mitigation. But her S3 makes it so that enemies can't counter her. So by that factor, both Charles and ML can, you know, she's going to be pretty good against. It's kind of like how S10 is really good against these two, right? Because they can't counter. Same thing, she's going to be pretty good against these two. Now, we're going to go down to the OK category. And these guys, the reason why I put them in OK is because they have some way of, like, you know, they either give themselves some buffs, and then they give the team buffs, but mitigate, or, you know, something like that. They give damage mitigation, right? Except for Kayron. So Crow gives everybody a buff, right? With S2. That's great. Automatically 40 fighting spirit right there. But it is a defense buff, so he is going to be mitigating a lot of that damage. So it basically counteracts the fighting spirit with that. Now, what you're going to be doing is you're going to getting your S3 back more often than if they didn't have defense buff. But because there is that defense buff, it is reducing your damage. So that's why I'd only say it's okay. Charlotte, she gives herself 2 buffs, so that's why I gave her an okay as well. I might move her down to the pretty useless. She's kind of at the bottom, you know, of this list. Same with Kayron, but like, Kayron and Charlotte kind of, you know, they're okay. I mean, Kayron, we'll go over him. He gives himself attack buff, immortality buff, and usually has immunity buff, right? So that's 3 buffs. That's the reason why he's an okay. But in reality, it's not that big of a difference. Diane, I would have put her in the counters slot, right? But the reason why I have her in okay is because, yet again, she gives damage mitigation, right? Now, if you do S3, S2, that's 3 buffs for everybody. That's basically 100% combat, not combat ready, focus every turn, right? So that's 90% focus every turn ish, I guess, for 1 turn probably. But because she is giving some sort of damage mitigation, you're going to be doing less damage overall because she has that. And your team is going to be doing less damage overall. Alencia, yet again, defense buff, same reason. And I already went over Kayron and Charlotte. Now, pretty useless because Lilius gives herself the shield from Provoke, I guess. ML Taiwan, actually, I should probably put him down to useless. RB, he runs Alexa's, pretty useless. I should probably put him down to useless. She gives herself stealth, kind of useless. Gives herself immunity, and this is probably a surprising one, and I'm going to pull this to the end and just talk about that afterwards. CDOM, actually no, I might pull her up to okay. She gives crit buff to everybody, and that makes it so that, you know, there's no damage mitigation, so decent actually. And then, actually, no, we're going to put her up here, good against. And then Alox, useless, 1 buff. Rel, useless, kind of like, you know, 1 buff-ish as well. And then FCC. This might come as a surprise, right? So I was talking about earlier, FCC, you start off the game basically with full focus, right? You blow your load into the enemy right away. Now, FCC, she mitigates damage. So your enemy's not going to be taking all of that much damage at first, right? But the real reason why I put her at useless is not because of, you know, the damage mitigation she brings by herself, but because a lot of times what's going to happen is you're going to get full focus because of her barrier. So you're going to open up with that, that's fine. But when you're trying to get it back, right? Basically every time you're getting full focus is probably going to be when she uses her S3 and gives everybody skill nullifier. And if everybody has skill nullifier, that means the next S3 you use isn't going to be effective. So it basically either A, you have to use it to burn the skill nullifier, or B, use your other units to burn the skill nullifier, but you're basically effectively adding another turn of cooldown to your skills because you're skipping a turn of using it, right? So that's why I think that she's not that, like, pretty useless against FCC. Because FCC just basically prevents her from doing damage. And then she gets countered by Cerise, in my opinion, because her main thing is cycling, going faster, moving up in CR. And if your Cerise makes it so she can't be pushed up in CR, then she's not going to be able to do her job. She's not going to be able to be effective. So there we go. And that is why I think that, you know, she's useless. Or she gets countered by Cerise. And then here, basically useless. They don't really give buffs, and these people are really not relevant because they actually, I should probably just put them right here. Doesn't give buffs. I mean, kind of does. We'll just put her up okay. And yet again, pretty useless because of the fact that she gives skill nullifier. So there we go. So if we're really looking at which meta units are meta and which units she does well against, so we have Charles isn't really all that meta. He's somewhat run at higher, but at higher RTA, not that much. Same with Ken, kind of a pocket pick. Rohan is very popular, so that's good. CDOM, very popular for cleave comps, but actually, I remember why I put these units down here. It's because you're really only going to bring her against bruiser lineups, right? So that's the reason why they're down here, because you're really only going to be bringing up against bruiser lineups, and these units aren't really used in bruiser lineups. But yeah, back to this again. So good against one really meta unit, counters one okay meta unit, and then these other units are I'd say not super meta. Okay against these 2, 3, 4 meta units. So you're really looking at bringing her into a fight with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5-ish units, basically. Is that really that good? I'm not sure I'd say so. So, in summary, I really don't think that she's going to be all that impactful. And, you know, I'm going to compare her to another unit, right? To give you kind of a sense of why I think she's not going to be great. Other than what I pointed out before. Put this into practice, right? So let's take a look at Charlotte. I compare her to Charlotte because what you want to do with Landy is use her S3 a ton, right? Cycle your turns, use her S3, big AoE nuke very often. About 2 to 3 turns, right? Once every 2 to 3 turns. Now Charlotte, she has a spammable AoE nuke with about the same multipliers. But, you know, it's a little bit on the lower side. But that makes up for it because it's spammable as opposed to Landy's, who's not exactly spammable. She kind of has a little bit of a cooldown, a little bit of a downtime. And also, Landy's faster, but Charlotte's a little bit slower. It all kind of balances out, right? So, Charlotte, 1.1 multiplier. And is she very relevant in the meta? I'd say that she is probably a niche pick. She's not picked very often. And, you know, even though she does kind of the same thing as Landy in that she does AoE a lot and do damage, she's not picked very often. And because of that, I don't think Landy's going to be picked very often either. She might be somewhat relevant, but not entirely relevant. And Charlotte's able to do this without conditions, right? Without requiring the enemy team having buffs, without, you know, having that fighting spirit to reset. So, in a sense, Charlotte is just kind of like a better Landy, but she's not in the meta. And yeah, that's why I don't think Landy is going to be all that relevant in the meta. You guys might think differently, and I definitely could be proved wrong. A lot of times these things happen where people think a unit's going to be great, and it ends up being not. Or people think the unit's not going to be great, and it becomes amazing. But from initial, you know, first look with the multipliers, it doesn't really look like she's being that great. And let me leave you with this final, you know, note, right? If you think about how Epic 7 works, one of the reasons why, you know, a unit like Alencia is so strong is because she does a ton of damage. She does strip, she does death break, she just does a ton, and it adds defense buff. She does a ton, right? Usually units that do a ton of stuff are the ones that are very relevant in the meta, very powerful. But Landy, pretty much all she does is do damage. And for that reason, and she has no gimmicks, right? She's not like a Kayron that could, you know, stay alive with immortality. It's not like an RB that can revive. Not like that at all. There's no gimmicks there. It's just straight up damage. So with that, she's probably not gonna be very powerful. And the other thing is, in this game, your goal is to make it so that the enemies are weaker than you and you're stronger than them, right? A lot of times you do this by buffing up your own units and stripping their buffs. But Landy, while she does get more powerful with them getting buffs, which would, you know, in theory incentivize them to not use buffs, she is not getting all that much stronger. She's reducing her cooldown by maybe like 2 turns, right? She is increasing her damage by a little bit, but that's only for her. The rest of your team is still weaker because the enemy has buffs over you. The rest of your team doesn't benefit at all from the enemy having buffs. Only Landy does. And when that happens, they could A, just kill the Landy, or B, just kind of ignore it because honestly, she doesn't do all that much damage. But that's just my opinion. That's just my thoughts again. And that about wraps up the video. So it's a little kind of long, but you know, I wanted to go in depth into like really taking a look at and dissecting the meta and dissecting what I think she can be good against, bad against, and give you the reasons why I think she is probably not going to be all that relevant. But she's a cool unit. She's limited. You should pull for her. As always, thumbs up if you enjoyed it. Thumbs down if you didn't. Tell me why. Not just because you don't agree with my opinion, but really a criticism for the video. And as always, comment below on your thoughts. And I'll see y'all on the next one. Remember to subscribe. Alright guys, peace out.